So first and foremost, a very happy new year to everyone. I hope you all had a great one. So last week I'd been trying out Regiments, and until recently it sort of slipped under my radar because, well, one factor was microprose. I mean, as a publisher, that was just a really odd concept. Back in the day, yes, massively, but they kind of vanished off the face of the planet. And the other thing was, I really hadn't read anything about it that was pushing any buttons, but I decided to give it a go anyway. So for those who have not played it before in one of the other playtests or seen much gameplay, it's a very strange mix of wargame and a more traditional RTS. For example, there is directional damage, but you control platoons or little groups of units rather than one, and the movement and positioning doesn't feel quite as exact as wargame. You have a deck of platoons, which is in some way similar to decks in wargame, though you're more selecting a regiment or a battle group rather than an individual unit card within the deck, and I think that's more like the divisions in SD2, which I'm just picking up in the sale and will have to try that out myself. So the overall scale is similar to wargame in terms of the map size, but it has the additions of things like auto-firing mortars, off-map RT, called-in airstrikes, and other support options. So it has some additions that we're possibly going to be seeing in Warno, to be honest. Anyhow, as always, if you've got any comments about the game or questions, feel free to ask them below in the comments, or hop into my Discord to discuss the game, but let's get on with the little review. So what did we get to play this time round? So this time it was the Operations game mode. This is almost like a mini campaign where you slowly progress across a map, in phases taking control of different points, with associated supply lines, so you have to follow a pattern across the map, taking control of it bit by bit, and then also defending those points that you already control. Now, the mode was split into phases which lasted 20 minutes each, and you had a variety of objectives, mainly points to capture within a certain number of phases. At the start of each phase, you could deploy your units within blue circles on the map, the deployment zones as it were, and then move around ones that were already placed on the map, such as from the previous phase. Those who were deployed seemed to get repaired and rearmed at this point too, though you could not give orders until the end of the deployment, but the game could stay paused at that point, so you could tell units how to position with a tactical pause almost. Then you went about your combat until the 20 minutes were up. At the end of each phase, you're taken back to what I would call the deck screen to reinforce squads, buy additional unit groups, upgrade those additional groups, or buy various support points such as extra deployment points, which allow you to bring in more units overall, extra supply. You do gain this slowly during the match, but obviously this gives you a bonus at the start. Points for calling in off-map support, and finally engineer points which allow you to build tank traps and various other emplacements. Though I must admit I did not experiment with the emplacements much, as I couldn't initially work out where to place them. I realised towards the end of my playtime you actually have to put them within the blue circles of the zones you're firmly in control of. These are usually the ones behind the front lines, so not always the most useful place to have these things. I really liked this screen and the options it provided. It added something extra to the strategy because you had to plan ahead where you were going to spend your points. You could buy extra units or deployment points, but if you do that and forget to reinforce the squads, then you might end up with no units to bring in. Basically, a little bit of careful planning is needed, and various games have things like this, but usually you only do it after a battle is completed, rather than phases during the battle where you spend these points. There is also a discard changes button on this screen, but it would have also been nice to maybe have an undo button, so you could take back one point or one decision you made, I should say, rather than having to reset it all and start again. Once you'd spent the points, you were taken to a screen to pick an event card. These could be something that helped you, or indeed something that benefited the enemy, such as them getting an elite squad to attack you. But basically, in essence, you had to choose one of these before most phases started. You continue taking the map and then potentially defending against the enemy forces until you reach the maximum amount of victory points expected for that operation, and then it's game over and you can play a different operation. Or at least that'll be the plan for the final game, I'm sure. Now, thinking specifically about the combat, I tried to take the game very slowly at first, much like how I play Wargame, but honestly it's designed to be played at a slightly faster pace. Generally, I felt like having a higher number of units was more beneficial than clever placement. However, that said, getting side or rear shots on the enemy was a massive difference in damage output, so sometimes it was about moving units around the enemy mid-battle. RT both on and off map played a significant role in progressing. The AI, however, also knew how to use this. Taking the map was not too hard. I relied heavily on the RT to soften up defender positions and then move around mopping up. From time to time they would counter-attack, but generally speaking I could clean this up with the forward units. I did have to pull units back and forth across the map a few times though. The main reason for the heavy reliance on the artillery was that units who sit in position for 50 seconds, I think it was, become entrenched, and then some could become further entrenched if they've remained there for longer, giving them a significant defensive bonus, although that said, directional damage still played a significant role in what happened to those units. So attacking them head on was an exercise in futility without raining hellfire down on them first. That said, you could potentially get round the back of them if there weren't any units protecting them there. Now, I found while the tanks were good, the infantry squads and their transports were by far the most powerful units in the game, both in terms of defense and attacking. Though obviously they struggled a little bit more when they had to cross open fields, but the map had plenty of forests and towns as cover. So buildings count as defense, but you can't specifically enter them like you can in Wargame. However, regardless, as long as they were crossing small distances in the open, the damage they output from missile launches and things far outweighed the damage they were taking most of the time. At the end of the campaign you are tasked with defending for as many phases as possible, and this was much more challenging. I was now on the receiving end of all that artillery on my entrenched units, and frankly I can see why it was so effective against the AI. Eventually the AI simply overran me with mass numbers of infantry, which as noted are extremely powerful in this game. The combat honestly felt a bit hit and miss. I felt the infantry were a bit too strong against tanks for example, and even the T-80s I was running around the map felt weak at times, and you have to really keep reversing them out the range of enemy units, and then they become very inaccurate. So it certainly did not feel like having the power horse of a T-80 UM in Wargame Red Dragon for example, and you were getting squads of 3 of them, so it was even worse. Now, it has some good other features in the game which I thought were very smart. One example of this is reinforcements. You have a set number of deployment points which you can expand on the decal planning screen, as we've mentioned. Although, unlike Wargame, if units die, you get their points back after a short amount of time, to then spend them again. And you can spend those points on the same unit or a unit of a different type. However, much like in Wargame, there are a set number of availability with each card. And if you call out 4 units for a platoon, that's 4 of the 8 total you might have, rather than a whole platoon counting as 1 availability. So if you lose that entire platoon of 4 units, then you've instantly lost half your availability. Now, unlike Wargame, however, you can retreat units off the map before they die. Retreating them also means they keep whatever veterancy they've gained, and you can call them back in fully repaired and resupplied. If you lost 1 vehicle, then it will just add another from the unit card supply to that platoon. This continues until there is no more availability, and then it'll just be greyed out. It forces you to make some difficult decisions, risk losing a unit, or retreat them to ensure they are saved but lose the point. Veterancy does seem to make a big difference at times, so losing ranked units does feel quite painful. Another unit type the game has are HQ units. Basically, these are command vehicles that coordinate other forces within their range, giving them a massive bonus to things like accuracy and morale. Certainly not a unit to be underestimated, but equally a unit that should be protected, sitting behind your units near the front line because they will be a prime target for the enemy. Now, another feature I quite liked in this game were the off-map call-ins, which were reminiscent of certain other RTS games. They were a lot of fun and they saved my bacon a lot of times. Some are targeted in very small areas such as the massive off-map missile or the napalm call-in. Others like the rocket strafing run have a wider area of possible damage. However, they will pick targets of opportunity as they fly in, so it might not hit exactly what you wanted. There are also other options like off-map smoke arty and area recon reveals, to name a few. My only note would be that the anti-air units didn't seem to pose much of a threat to these call-ins, so most of the time they would get in and fire off their attacks without being shot down. There were a couple of times they perhaps got stunned and didn't drop their payload, however. A quick comment on helicopters. They seemed like a group of buzzing flies or bees when I was being attacked by them, and it's certainly not what I've come to expect from this type of game. They were just a bit odd, and they certainly did not feel substantial, like when you fly in with an attack chopper in a wargame, so I think they need a rework. Now overall, the operations game mode was quite fun. I enjoyed the progression across the map with the control points and the supply lines. I also liked that once you secured more points, the ones behind got an allied squad to defend them, and you were able to place units at the start of the phase within the wider blue circles further forward, so you weren't always spawning right at the back of the map. One thing I would have liked to see, which I didn't see an option for, was perhaps to upgrade the allied squads that were defending those positions, either by adding another set of units or a second platoon, or in fact replacing them with more powerful units to provide some extra defense if you did get pushed back. I guess the other option there would be to spend engineering points, but these were something that you had to pay for each time rather than something you just gradually got drip fed to you during the match. So I think a different way to handle those points would be beneficial, and it might mean you were more likely to use them. One thing that I didn't like about the game were sound cues being missing. There was a massive lack of warning when units were getting attacked, and there were a few times I lost units without ever knowing they were even being attacked. So I was fighting on one side of the map, I'd look at the other side of the map, and suddenly all of my T-80s would be gone that were in a defensive position. So I would really like to see some kind of improvement here in either a visual notification or indeed more sound cues to let you know that something's in trouble. I usually say something about the graphics, so I will say something. I'll say that they're nice for what they are. The maps are very good, they're quite detailed. I like the little towns and the buildings. I think the units could be better than they are, considering some of the other games we've seen recently, such as the detail on the Broken Arrow units. I think they just look a bit better. However, overall, I think it was nice looking. I think the sounds for the most part are good, it's just missing some of those sound cues, which I'm sure they could add by the game's release. So in summary, I enjoyed the operations game mode overall. The progression across the map was fun, the call-ins added a little something extra to the game, and the fact that AI knew how to use them too made everything a bit more unpredictable, which was not a bad thing. However, the units need some rebalancing in my mind. Tanks just felt weak and inaccurate for what they were, and the helos certainly need a rework of some kind. I have no idea how this would play in skirmish or multiplayer, with or without this sort of control point system. However, I feel it's one of those things that would be very different to play against real people than to play against the AI, because the tactics are going to change significantly. So I can't say for sure whether it would still be as enjoyable. I need to be able to try it out. So hopefully we will get another playtest soon which lets us delve back into skirmish or multiplayer. And I know I missed that, I think, earlier in 2021. So fingers crossed. Has anyone else played the test? What did you think of it? Let me know down below in the comments. Or come and chat on Discord about it. Always fun to have a chat there. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Please do like, share and subscribe, and have a fantastic week.